Rain lashed the barren desert as thunder split the twilight, and a lone figure, bound and bleeding, was dragged along the riverbank by cruel, jeering voices. In that frenzied moment, with water mixing with blood on her trembling face and her swollen belly a silent testament to both hope and dread, one desperate thought surged through her mind. Escape was the only way. Eleanor Pierce, once a cherished wife of a notorious outlaw whose name was feared in every saloon and on every dusty trail, now found herself a wounded, pregnant widow on the run. The bitter taste of betrayal lingered on her lips as her in-laws, hardened by greed and cruelty, dragged her from the remnants of her shattered home. They believed she held the key to hidden loot, a secret that could unsettle their ill-gotten fortunes. And in punishing her, they sought to erase any chance she might speak the truth. Eleanor's spirit, though battered by years of abuse and the pain of loss, burned with a quiet resilience that would not be so easily extinguished. Under the darkened skies of Red Mesa, Arizona, the desert revealed its merciless nature. The river in full, wild flood roared against its banks, its tumult echoing the chaos of Eleanor's plight. Her arms were roughly bound with coarse rope, and mud mixed with blood as she was hauled along the treacherous bank. Rough hands gripped her waist, pulling her forward with force that threatened to crush her, while harsh voices barked obscenities in a language as cold as the desert night. Every step was agony, every heartbeat a desperate prayer for reprieve. Yet beneath the layers of pain, a stubborn ember of defiance flickered deep within her eyes. "Keep moving," one of her tormentors bellowed, his voice void of compassion as he shoved her along the slippery bank. The chilled water splashed at her feet, and the sound of raging currents drowned out her stifled cries. Eleanor's heart pounded with terror and sorrow, but also in unyielding determination, an inner promise that she would not let this night define her fate. Each ragged breath, painful and unsteady, melded with the sound of the storm and ignited memories of love, loss, and the small, flickering hope of a better tomorrow. Just when the weight of despair threatened to overwhelm her, a powerful presence broke through the tempest. Cutting across the turbulent, rain-streaked horizon rode a solitary figure atop a sleek, ebony stallion. The rider's silhouette, cloaked in a long, worn duster and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed eyes filled with solemn determination, seemed to materialize as if summoned by fate. His arrival was sudden and singular, a stark contrast of brutality that had surrounded Eleanor moments before. With measured speed and an air of quiet authority, he surged toward her, his figure resolute against the storm's fury. "Miss," his voice carried over the din, deep and steady, a sound of hope thrust into harsh reality. Though Eleanor's ears were filled with the clamor of the enraged in-laws, the murmur of his words penetrated the veil of terror. There was no time for hesitation. With a swift motion, the stranger spurred his horse forward and intercepted the grim procession. His eyes, piercing and compassionate, fixed upon her with a tenderness that belied the rugged exterior of a man hardened by the frontier's cruelty. In that heartbeat, when the world seemed to hang suspended between night and dawn, salvation dawned. Elias Ward, as the stranger soon introduced himself without ceremony, was a wealthy rancher known in hushed tones across Red Mesa for his principled reserve and quiet heroism. His own past was marred by loss, a family torn apart by feuds and misfortune, but he had channeled his sorrow into strength and the drive to protect those who had nowhere else to turn. Observing the scene with a steely gaze, Elias calmly pulled alongside the group of brutal men. "Enough," he said in a low, measured tone that carried the authority of a man who had seen too much suffering. "Let her go." His words were simple, but they cut through the chaos like a clean blade across tattered silk. The men, taken aback by the ferocity in Elias's tone and the unwavering resolve in his eyes, hesitated for a crucial moment. In that pause, as the storm roared and the river surged, Elias dismounted with purposeful grace. Rushing to Eleanor's side, he deftly severed some of the ropes with a sharp knife, his actions fluid and practiced. "Come with me," he commanded gently, his hand extended in assurance. Though pain seared through her battered arms and the chill of the rain stung her skin, Eleanor, her eyes bright with a mix of terror and hope, reached out to him. In a flurry of motion that defied the fury of the elements, Elias hoisted her onto his horse. The stallion sprang into action, its powerful legs carrying both man and wounded widow away from the clutches of her pursuers. The tumult of furious shouts and the scrambling of cruel brutes receded behind them, swallowed by the sound of galloping hooves and the relentless drumming of rain. In that moment, as the storm thundered against the vast expanse of the desert, the promise of a new beginning shone faintly in the darkness. The ride was agonizing and surreal. Elias guided his horse along a narrow, winding trail that carved through the rugged landscape. Eleanor's mind swirled with suppressed pain and the overwhelming relief of escape. The drubbing, the inhumane treatment, the desperate jeers of those who sought to break her spirit, all of it receded into a distant memory, like smoke on the wind. Yet beneath it all, a quiet resolve began to kindle. In the silence punctuated by the pounding hooves and the soft murmur of the wind, Elias's protective presence enveloped her. His steady hand on her shoulder seemed to say without words, "You are no longer alone, and here, among these endless plains, you can begin to reclaim your identity." The relentless rain began to ease as they raced across the desert, the first hints of a cloud break promising the cautious arrival of dawn. Elias's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, ever alert for the threat that might follow. His heart, though burdened with his own hidden sorrows, now beat with fierce protective urgency for Eleanor. She dared not speak for some time, her thoughts too vivid to capture in words. The taste of rain on her lips, the sting of bruised skin, and the swirling emotions of fear and fragile hope mingling in the quiet of the ride. As they approached the outskirts of the sprawling ranch, a sanctuary of weathered barns, sprawling corridors of red clay, and vast fields blending into the smoky distance, Eleanor allowed herself a trembling sigh of relief. Yet even as the familiar outlines of Elias Ward's estate grew clear against the pre-dawn sky, a shiver of foreboding danced along her spine. In the distance, silhouetted against the awakening light, she could swear she saw a dark, lingering figure, a shadow watching, waiting, a warning, perhaps, that her pursuers were not yet vanquished. Elias sensed her unease and, with a firm but kindly glance, assured her, "You're safe now. We're home." But even as his words offered comfort, the lingering threat of the harsh world outside pressed in, an inescapable reminder that the past, with all its cruelty and heartache, might yet cast its long shadow over her future. The ranch door loomed ahead, a heavy wooden barrier against the storm, and as Elias guided her inside, thunderstorms of noise receded into a tense hush. Inside, the flicker of oil lamps and the soft creak of old cedar filled the space with a weary welcome. Yet even as the door closed behind them with a resounding thump that spoke of fragile sanctuary, the distant sound of pursuit, low murmurings, the clattering of hooves, echoed in the darkness outside. Eleanor's heart, already bruised yet inexplicably hopeful, pounded with both relief and apprehension. The sanctuary was theirs for the moment, but the danger was not wholly behind them. Could this new identity, the protection promised by Elias Ward, truly shelter her from the relentless terrors of her past? Or would the dark eyes of her pursuers eventually find a way to breach even these hallowed walls? As she settled against a rough-hewn table, still damp from rain and heart-heavy with remembrance, Eleanor stared out the grimy window at the desert beyond. Somewhere among the ancient, wind-worn stones and shifting sand lay the promise of a new life, a life defined not by the cruelty of her in-laws, but by the hope offered by a kind stranger who dared to bring her home. And with that thought, amid the quiet lull of the ranch's early hours, a single question echoed in her mind. Would this sanctuary be enough to let her leave the past behind, or was this only the beginning of a far longer, perilous journey? As the ranch door closes with final, resonant thud and the distant pursuit continues to murmur in the chill of the night, Eleanor's uncertain future hangs in the balance, a promise of refuge shadowed by the threat that may still come for her. Inside Elias Ward's ranch, a cautious calm began to replace the lingering echoes of pursuit. The heavy wooden door, now securely bolted, stood as the first line of defense against the cruel world outside. In the dim glow of a low-burning lantern, Eleanor Pierce sat on a rough-hewn bench near the central hearth. Her eyes, still shadowed by the terror of her escape, now held a glimmer of hope. The silver locket that had borne witness to her agony and dreams of freedom rested against her chest, a tangible reminder of both her painful past and the promise of a new identity. Elias moved quietly through the spacious, sparsely furnished parlor. He offered Eleanor a warm cup of bitter coffee and a knitted blanket, small gestures that spoke volumes of a protective nature. His deep-set eyes, reflecting a sorrowful past marked by family feuds and loss, softened when he looked at her. Without prying into her story, his silence and steady presence reassured her that here she could begin to heal. As dawn crept over the vast, storm-washed plains of Red Mesa, word of Elias Ward's sanctuary began to spread even in the isolated corners of the desert. Rumors traveled in hushed tones among those who had suffered under similar cruelties. A wealthy rancher with a heart hardened by personal loss who offered refuge to wounded souls. It wasn't long before the sound of distant horses and the dust of travel announced that she was not alone. One by one, 3 more women arrived at the ranch, each carrying her own burden of grief and survival. The first to appear was Martha, a woman in her 50s with a stoic bearing and eyes that held the quiet pain of countless nights lost to sorrow. Her face, lined with the memories of a once bright smile, was set in determined silence. Rumor had it that she had lost her only child to the cruelty of an in-law feud, an act that scarred her deeply, though hushed whispers spoke of her battles with fate. Her arrival here carried the unmistakable air of someone who had exhausted every means of escape but now sought refuge and, perhaps, vengeance. Not long after Martha, a softer, more nurturing figure emerged from the dusty horizon. Hannah. In her 40s, Hannah had once been a respected healer in a small outlaw town, a woman whose gentle touch had soothed many ailments. Now, her arms bore the marks of a hard life, and the lines on her face spoke of grief not easily forgotten. She clutched a small bundle of herbs and medicines to her chest, as if ready to distribute not just cures but comfort to anyone willing to listen. Her eyes, warm and kind beneath a hooded shawl, hinted at a resilience that had allowed her to survive even the cruelest twists of fate. The last to make the journey was Lydia, a timid young widow barely out of her teens. Her delicate frame and trembling manner belied an inner strength that was only just beginning to bloom. Having faced abuse and abandonment in a household that scorned her youth, Lydia had escaped silently, her eyes wide with dread and longing. She carried little more than a worn satchel and a heart burdened by loss. Yet within her, the faintest spark of determination was starting to kindle, a desire to claim her future, however uncertain, on her own terms. Elias greeted each newcomer with a reserved nod and a word of welcome. In the soft light of early morning, as the desert's chill still clung to the air, they gathered around a long, rough-hewn table in the main dining room. The table, scarred by time and countless hardships, suddenly served as a meeting place for these survivors. Although silence weighed heavily at first, tentative conversations soon broke out in hushed, respectful tones, their words laced with shared tragedy and the tentative hope of rebirth. Eleanor, still cradling her own memories in the precious locket, found solace in the quiet presence of her new companions. She exchanged glances with Martha, whose eyes flickered with experiences of sorrow and survival, with Hannah, whose gentle smile offered a promise of care, and with Lydia, whose uncertainty spoke of raw potential waiting to be nurtured. In that moment, the ranch transformed into a fragile yet promising bastion of found family, its weathered walls and creaking beams echoing not only pain but the possibility of healing. Throughout the day, routine tasks at the ranch became symbols of resistance and renewal. Under the warm glow of a midday sun, Elias guided them to the repair of a sagging barn roof. Eleanor found herself wielding a hammer alongside Martha, each strike a determined punctuation to her promise to reclaim her life. Hannah gathered herbs from a small garden near the house to brew soothing tea, her actions tenderly mending broken spirits. Lydia, though shy at first, took up sweeping the loose dirt from the porch, her careful movements a quiet declaration of her desire to belong. during a pause in the labor, as the soft scent of cedar smoke mingled with the arid breeze. Elias sat with Eleanor on the steps outside the main hall. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. "This land holds many secrets," he said softly, his voice low as if confiding a cherished memory. "It has seen sorrow and joy alike, and like the river that cuts through these plains, it carves paths for those brave enough to follow it." Eleanor's gaze fell to the silver locket, its surface catching the faint light as she clutched it tighter. It was a relic of the past, one that she had long burdened herself with. But now, in the gentle warmth of Elias's words and the camaraderie of her newfound sisters, it began to feel less like a chain and more like a stepping stone. Yet even as the day promised moments of hope and rebuilding, the threat of her pursuers lingered like a dark stain against the horizon. The memory of that stormy night by the river, the cruel hands that had dragged her away, and the mournful echo of in-laws' jeers never truly left her. A subtle unease crept over the sanctuary as the sound of a distant horse's clip-clop disturbed the still air. Elias's eyes narrowed momentarily as he listened. An unfathomable understanding of the Ashcroft enforcers, or perhaps another bloodthirsty band of in-laws led by their greedy patriarch, were still on the prowl. As work on the ranch wound down for the evening, a nervous tension began to mount. A quiet moment around the flickering porch light revealed small clues. A boot print near the back gate that was too fresh, a scrap of fabric caught on a splintered post, that whisper of intrusion. At first, none of the widows dared to speak. Their silence was a shield against the terror of being found. However, as the twilight deepened and the desert winds carried unsettling whispers, Martha's gravelly voice broke the cautious quiet. "I reckon we got company," she stated, her tone measured but laced with worry. Eyes met across the table as the weight of her words settled in. Hannah reached for a tin lantern, its dim light trembling in her hand, as Lydia shuffled to the window, peering into the encroaching darkness. Eleanor, though still burdened by the echoes of her past and her in-laws' cruelty, felt something shift within her, a resolve to stand and fight for the sanctuary. "We must be ready," she said, her voice louder than she'd expected. "They're not gone. They're lurking out there." Her words, trembling yet fierce, kindled a determined energy among the group. Elias stood and surveyed the assembled family with a mixture of stern resolve and quiet sympathy. "Tonight, we secure every inch of this ranch. We keep watch, and we do not let fear dictate our future." His measured command was met with nods of understanding from the widows and the ranch hands alike. As dusk turned to a starlit night, the ranch buzzed with subdued urgency. Shadows danced across the weathered logs and patched walls, and every distant sound set hearts racing. Just as the group dispersed to their respective posts, a sudden, unmistakable knock at the heavy door sent a collective shudder through the room. The sound was deliberate and ominous, a messenger bearing tidings of betrayal or further threat. The widows exchanged anxious looks, and Eleanor felt her pulse quicken as she clutched her locket for solace. Elias moved open the door, his trained eyes scanning the darkness beyond. On the threshold, bound in a rough cloth and with a stamped seal that bore the grim mark of her pursuers, lay a note. The paper was soaked with rain and stained with dirt, yet the message was clear. It was a threat signed by the insidious Amos, an in-law patriarch known for his ruthless pursuit of hidden loot. "Your refuge is temporary," the note warned in harsh, jagged script, "and the Ashcrofts will reclaim what is theirs." A heavy silence fell upon the room. The note's arrival confirmed that the threat was not yet extinguished. Their sanctuary, however newfound, was still marked by the shadow of relentless pursuit. Eleanor's eyes filled with a blend of fear and determination as she read the words, feeling the locket at her chest pulse like a drum of defiance. Beside her, Martha's expression hardened, while Hannah wrapped an arm around Lydia, who trembled but nodded determinedly. Elias crumpled the note in his fist, the lines on his face deepening with regret and resolve. "We knew this day would come," he murmured, his tone grim yet resolute. "They'll try to break us, but we are stronger than their greed." In that charged moment, The bonds of found family and shared suffering steeled each soul present at the ranch. As the night's dark canvas stretched over Red Mesa, the flickering lanterns and hushed voices bore witness to a fragile unity, one that was determined to hold against the encroaching threat. Yet, amid the cautious optimism and the preparations for defense, a single, unspoken question lingered in the hearts of all. Could the sanctuary truly keep them safe when the dark forces of their past pursued them with relentless fury? As the note's ominous message settles over the gathered widows and Elias, the distant sound of an approaching carriage hints at another dire threat, one that may shatter their fragile hope and force them into a final, desperate stand. The sound of the approaching carriage grew louder, punctuating the hushed tension that had settled over Elias Ward's ranch. Outside the battered main door, the steady clatter of hooves and the creak of wheels on dusty earth signaled that the threat, as forewarned by the ominous note, was drawing near. Inside, a collective shiver passed among the gathered widows and ranch hands. Eleanor Pierce, still clutching her cherished silver locket, exchanged a wary glance with Elias. The warmth of the sanctuary felt fragile now, as if one misstep would shatter their hard-won peace. Elias stepped deliberately to the side window, peering into the inky darkness beyond. A narrow beam of lantern light from the carriage's interior revealed a solitary figure leaning over the window of the dusty coach. The man's face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes glinted with a hardness that chilled the blood. Elias's jaw tightened imperceptibly. This messenger carried the unmistakable mark of Amos, the ruthless patriarch whose greed had long tormented these widowed souls. "Stay close," Elias instructed in a low, measured tone, his voice carrying both authority and concern. He motioned for Eleanor to join him, and the two moved quietly to the door. As they watched, the carriage creaked to a stop near the ranch's front gate, its engine of wooden wheels grinding against a rock-strewn path. In that tense, frozen moment, the world outside the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Inside the main hall, the other widows, Martha, with her steely eyes that masked a lifetime of sorrow, Hannah, whose gentle presence belied a strength gained through years of healing, and Lydia, timid yet determined, huddled together in anxious silence. Their collective experience of pain and survival forged a bond between them, a quiet communion of those who had lost so much but found courage in each other's company. They listened intently for any sign of further intrusion, hearts attuned to every shift of the desert wind. Then, as if on cue, a soft thud emanated from the front porch. Elias, ever vigilant, opened the door just a crack to peek outside. He saw, in the periphery of the carriage, a small envelope fluttering against the weathered wood of the gate. With practiced caution, he retrieved the package and quickly closed the door. Inside, under the flicker of a single oil lamp, he unfolded the paper with callous fingers. The message was brief but damning. Amos demands that you surrender the widows. Their wounds and secret locket lead to the hidden loot, or suffer the consequences. The note's angry script confirmed that the Ashcroft legacy was not merely a threat of pursuit. It was a calculated plan to reclaim both wealth and power. Eleanor's heart pounded as she reached for the locket, her eyes brimming with both fear and defiance. "They know," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "They know my secret." The locket, passed down from her late husband, had always been a painful reminder of a past marked by betrayal. Now it represented a potential map to hidden treasure. Rumors had long circulated that her husband's fortune included a secret that Amos and his ilk coveted. Martha stepped forward, her weather hand steady as she leaned against the rough-hewn table in the sparsely lit parlor. "We must be prepared," she stated firmly. "Amos will not stop until he takes everything from us. Our dignity, our freedom." Her tone, edged with the grief of recent losses, carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. Hannah, ever the nurturer, gathered some blankets and carefully organized a corner of the room for emergency defense. Her soft-spoken words reassured the group despite the threat. "We stand together. You are all safe here, as long as we keep our wits about us." Lydia, usually so timid, clutched at her own small satchel and mustered a shaky bravery. I saw something at the edge of the gate, she confessed, eyes wide. A footmark and a scrap of cloth that didn't belong to any of us. Her admission set the room abuzz with anxious murmurs. The suggestion that someone within their midst, or an unseen spy, had relayed their location to Amos only deepened the tension. Elias's voice, calm yet unyielding, soon interrupted the rising clamor. We cannot let fear paralyze us. We have a chance, however slim, to outwit them. He paced slowly before the widows, his eyes flickering with thoughts of battles fought long ago and friends lost too soon. I propose we set a trap. If Amos believes he can catch us here, we shall turn his own scheme against him. Eleanor, I need your locket. The request sent a shiver through Eleanor. For years, the locket had been a silent witness to her vulnerability. Now, it might be the very key to thwarting the greed that pursued them. With trembling determination, she removed the silver locket from around her neck and handed it to Elias. Take it, she said, her voice fierce. Let it be a symbol of our defiance. Elias turned the locket over in his calloused hand, scrutinizing its delicate engravings in the light of the oil lamp. Amos believes that within its clasp lies a clue to the hideaway of our lost fortune, he explained in a low murmur. This is the bait we shall use. He eyed the group, his voice resolute. We will display it prominently at the front. Let them see it and come directly to us. Then when they are within range, we strike. The plan was daring, risky, and fraught with the peril of exposure, but it held the promise of turning the tables on those who had tormented them. As the desert darkened further outside, Elias and the widows began to ready themselves. They bolted windows, reinforced doors with weathered planks, and spread oil lanterns along the perimeter to cast long, ominous shadows. The ranch, once a quiet haven, was being transformed into a fortress of hope and defiance. As preparations neared completion, a tense silence fell over the group. Then, out beyond the battered gate, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats and the clink of metal broke the quiet. Closer now than before. The air was thick with anticipation as the distant carriage, now an apparition outlined in flickering light, crested the ridge. Each thunderous beat of its wheels sent ripples of fear and determination to the gathered assembly. Inside, Elias positioned the locket on a handcrafted wooden stand near the main doorway, its reflective surface catching the glimmer of lamplight and becoming an unyielding beacon of their defiance. Let them come, he declared, his tone unwavering. If they dare to try and steal our hope, they'll find that we are not defenseless. Eleanor, Martha, Hannah, and Lydia gathered close around him, their shared desperation mingling with a swelling determination. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, they weren't merely victims of cruelty, but active participants in a plan of their own making. Eleanor's eyes flickered with fierce resolve as she gazed at the symbolic locket. It represented everything she had lost, and everything she would now fight to reclaim. As the moon's pale light gave way to the burgeoning glow of early dawn, the distant sounds of hostile force grew unmistakably clear. The inescapable thud of disciplined hoofbeats and the staccato clatter of gear signaled that the adversary was at the very gates of their sanctuary. A cold draft swept through the reinforced halls of the ranch, as if the desert itself warned them of the impending battle. In that charged moment, Lydia's timid voice pierced the air, unexpectedly resolute. I saw footprints last night that did not belong here. They lead straight to the east gate. Her words, softly spoken, carried an urgency that awakened a memory of her narrow escape from an abusive past. The collective eyes of the group fell upon her, and for a heartbeat, silence reigned as they acknowledged a betrayal that might come from beyond their walls. Elias's jaw tightened at the news, and his eyes darkened with a mix of regret and resolution. Then that will be the point where we make our stand, he said, his voice firm as he peered out into the deepening pre-dawn gloom. Stay alert. We have little time. If Amos and his men are following Lydia's tracks, they'll be here soon. As tension soared with every passing minute, Eleanor clutched the locket as if it were the very soul of her defiance. The ranch had become a crucible where hope battled despair, where found family now formed the unbreakable chain of their survival. In the flickering glow of the oil lanterns, every face around her, whether with grief, still with resolve, and bright with the promise of a new dawn, spoke volumes without uttering a single word. And then, amid the rising chorus of distant hooves, a sudden, sharp cry echoed from the east side of the ranch, a cry that was unmistakably human and laced with terror. It was a sound that froze the blood and sent shivers down every spine. In that instant, the carefully constructed calm shattered. Heads turned toward the source of the cry, and Elias, with his heart pounding like a war drum, raised his hand to signal silence. The cry repeated, a brief, panicked wail that could only mean that one of their own was in imminent danger. Martha's eyes locked with Eleanor's, and in that silent exchange, a mutual understanding passed between them. The threat was not just from the relentless in-laws outside, but perhaps also from within, from secrets that could unravel them all. Elias moved swiftly toward the direction of the cry, his figure merging with the dark silhouettes cast by lantern light. "Stay here," he ordered firmly to the widows, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. As he disappeared down the corridor, Eleanor felt a pit form in her stomach. The locket, now more than ever, was a symbol for her, a mirrored emblem of the hope she fought for, and the price of betrayal that threatened to consume them. Outside, as the echo of the cry faded and the dawn crept slowly over the rugged horizon, an unsettling chill settled over the ranch. The distant sounds of approaching riders grew louder still, with hearts heavy and determination renewed by both fear and resolve. The assembled family prepared for what was to come. As the pre-dawn light deepens and a cry of terror lingers in the air, the threat of betrayal and the sound of closing hoofbeats leave Eleanor and the others wondering, will their fragile sanctuary withstand the impending assault, or will darkness claim them once more? The night held its breath as the unsettling echoes from the east gate continued to disturb the uneasy calm of Elias Ward's ranch. The cry, that desperate human sound of pain and fear, reverberated against the weathered walls and mingled with the rustling desert wind. Outside, the steady clatter of hooves had grown ominously near, as if the very earth whispered that the inescapable threat of Amos's men was closing in once more. Inside the main hall, a dim array of oil lanterns cast flickering light over anxious faces. Eleanor Pierce, her silver locket clutched tightly in one hand, sat at the heavy wooden table with the other widows, stoic Martha, nurturing Hannah, and timid Lydia. Their silent communion, forged in suffering and newfound hope, had grown stronger these past tense hours. Yet as the echo of that anguished cry faded into the night, a new chill seemed to settle in, a premonition that their sanctuary was not as secure as they dared believe. Elias Ward moved with quiet purpose toward the eastern corridor, his seasoned eyes alert beneath the brim of his weathered hat. He had heard the cry, a sound that sliced through the silence with a promise of danger, and now his steps were measured, determined. The widows watched in hushed apprehension as he paused by a narrow doorway that led to the outside. His hand rested on the polished grip of his rifle, and for a heartbeat, the fierce determination in his eyes set all hearts racing. From just beyond the doorway, a wounded ranch hand staggered into view, his face pale and smeared with the grime of battle. His breath came in uneven gasps, and his eyes darted around as if seeking refuge within the darkness. Elias's steady voice broke the silence, low and unwavering. "Speak, man. What has happened?" The injured worker, his voice trembling, managed a croak. They set traps? I was caught in one. I barely escaped. I saw one of our own passing a message. His words trailed off as he slumped against the frame of the doorway. A murmur ran through the assembled widows, and fear mingled with incredulity. Lydia's hand shook violently at the mention of betrayal. Martha's eyes narrowed, hardened by loss, as she exchanged a troubled glance with Hannah, whose warm eyes now shone with a quiet sorrow. Eleanor's grip on her locket tightened. The suggestion that someone among them had betrayed their location to Amos, whose merciless pursuit was legendary, was a wound too fresh for them all. Elias gently helped the wounded man inside and closed the door with resolute finality, sealing off that ominous stretch of darkness. with the injured ranch hand resting on a creaking cot by the hearth. Elias gathered the widows around him in the soft glow of the lantern light. "There's a traitor among us, or someone has given up our secret," he explained gravely, his voice measured but heavy with disappointment. "The note from Amos demands that we surrender the widows, and now we see that our enemies may have been fed our location from within." His eyes met each of theirs, silently urging them to stand firm despite the sting of betrayal. Eleanor, her heart still pounding with the adrenaline of past horrors, rose slowly. "We cannot allow them to break what we have built here," she declared, her voice low but steady. "If they believe our weakness lies within us, then they are sorely mistaken." With every word, her eyes flashed with defiance as the silver locket, once a painful reminder of loss, began to glimmer as a talisman of newly forged courage. The group resolved on a plan. Elias, with his deep knowledge of the harsh lands and the cunning tactics of those who preyed upon the vulnerable, proposed to use the locket as bait. "Amos believed that this token carries a map of secrets and loot," he explained, gesturing toward Eleanor's pendant. "We shall display it at the east gate, where the enemy expect to find us, and when they come, we'll be ready." Though risky, the idea sparked a determined glimmer in every eye. It was a plan born of desperation, and fueled by the hope of turning the tables on their relentless pursuers. Across the room, Martha spoke for the first time in a measured, gravelly tone. "I have seen harder days than these, and I will not let the sins of our past claim our future." Her words, though few, bolstered the small circle's resolve. Hannah quietly fussed over a bundle of blankets to keep the vulnerable warm, while Lydia, whose timid nature belied a burgeoning strength, offered to help Elias secure extra planks along the vulnerable east-facing door. Their collective action stitched together a fragile tapestry of found family, their hearts and hands united against the coming storm. Outside, the wind shifted, and as if answering their silent vow, distant hoofbeats grew louder again. Every sound, the creak of old wood, the soft rustle of desert sage, the faint scent of horse sweat carried on a cooling breeze, reminded them that the enemy was drawing inexorably near. Elias approached the entrance with a team of loyal ranch hands, their rifles low and eyes scanning the starlit darkness beyond. In the dim light, a solitary carriage crept along the ridge, its lanterns a ghostly glow amid the endless desert. The presence of the carriage confirmed their worst fears. Amos's men were not only lurking at the edges, but were ready to strike. Before the ominous carriage reached the enclave of the ranch, a sudden commotion erupted near the east gate. A sharp, panicked cry, different from the earlier wail of the wounded hand, cut through the night. It was a sound so raw and unexpected that it made every heart in the room skip a beat. Elias motioned urgently for the widows to hide behind stacked crates and thick bundles of forage. Their breaths mingled in a tense silence as the light from outside flickered wildly. From the shadows emerged a lone figure, a messenger, or perhaps one of Amos's own, clad in tattered, dust-covered clothes. His eyes were wild, and in a shaky voice he screamed, "They are coming in numbers. The in-laws and Amos himself, they mean to ransack everything." The revelation plunged the room into chaos. The threat was no longer an abstract menace. It was imminent, manifesting at their doorstep like a vengeful storm. Eleanor clutched her locket with renewed fervor, the pendant's cool surface a final talisman against despair. "We must not be caught unprepared," she proclaimed, her voice tinged with both trembling fear and fierce resolve. "Let us show them that we are not the broken, wounded souls they expect us to be." Her words, echoing off the creaking walls, galvanized the found family around her. At that moment, as the lantern light danced against the furrowed faces of the widows and the steadfast gaze of Elias, an unexpected ally emerged from the dim corridor of the main house. A quiet, weathered preacher known simply as Jeremiah. His presence, exuding calm and melancholy wisdom, lent an ethereal reassurance to the anxious assembly. "God grant strength to those who stand together," he intoned softly, "and in unity there is safety." His words, simple yet profound, cut through the tension and helped steady trembling hearts. Elias, now with renewed determination, signaled for everyone to take their positions. "Prepare to meet them head-on," he commanded, his voice a resolute murmur that blended with the rising sound of approaching hooves. The plan was set. They would use a locket as bait, drawing the enemy into a trap. They would be ready to spring. Every moment felt charged with the promise of violence and liberation, a final test of their collective courage. As the chill of pre-dawn settled over Red Mesa, an eerie silence blanketed the ranch for a heartbeat. Then, through the dusty haze and under a twilight sky heavy with unexpressed fury, a new sound emerged, a rustle at the gate, followed by a heavy boot step. The assembled group tensed, eyes darting toward the dark silhouette that crept along the boundary. In that critical moment, when hope and fear intertwined like the desert vines that clung to the weathered barns, a single, unmistakable cry rang out, a cry that would change everything. As the sound of a lone, defiant cry pierces the silence, the widows and Elias brace themselves, heartbeats quickening in unison. Will this be the harbinger of their final stand, or a signal that the darkness is about to reclaim their sanctuary? The pre-dawn air shimmered with a trembling promise of both hope and menace, a silence pierced by the distant, echoing beat of hooves and the low murmur of voices that foretold the final reckoning. In the cool twilight over Red Mesa, the ranch stood as a weathered bastion amid swirling dust and whispering winds. Every creak of its ancient wood and every flicker of lantern light testified to the trials that had brought these wounded souls together. Now, as the ominous figure of Amos's men advanced near the east gate, the widows and Elias Ward braced themselves for what could be their last stand in defense of their newly built sanctuary. Eleanor Pierce, her silver locket still clutched in her hand as if it were both shield and sword, led the determined group. The locket, once a painful memento of her past betrayal, had become a symbol of defiance, a talisman to expose the truth hidden within its delicate etchings. Tonight, it was to be their bait. With resolute eyes, she stepped forward and in a voice that trembled with both fear and unyielding courage declared, "If they seek our ruin, then let our secret be the spark that burns their greed to ash." Her words, soft yet fierce, merged with the low, steady resolve of Elias as he moved to position his men along the vulnerable east side of the ranch. Elias, a man whose stoic silence concealed a lifetime of sorrow and quiet valor, had spent the past night planning every contingency. He had scouted the nearby ridge, mapping the enemy's probable path and fortifying the ranch with makeshift barricades crafted from rough-hewn planks and salvaged feed crates. As he prepared for the inevitable assault, his mind wandered briefly to memories of a lost family, echoes of laughter and light long extinguished, but such thoughts were swiftly replaced by a singular duty, the protection of these women who had, through shared suffering, come to represent his own lost hopes. In the dim glow of the lanterns, the widows gathered, each a portrait of resilience. Martha's steely gaze, hardened by the loss of her child, now softened into determined resolve. Hannah, whose once gentle touch had soothed many wounds, silently offered quiet reassurances with every careful glance. Lydia, timid no more than a trembling bud in need of nurturing, had found a spark of bravery in their solidarity. Their eyes met in a wordless communion, as if to say, "We are no longer broken." Together, they had become a found family, defying the cruelty of those who had once sought to exploit their pain. As the first rays of hesitant dawn began to penetrate the horizon, a distant carriage's wheels groaned over hard-packed earth. The sound grew louder and then abruptly ceased at the edge of the fortified east gate. For a long, breathless moment, silence reigned. All eyes were fixed on the ridge where shadows danced and merged beneath the light of a stark, emerging sun. Then, with a sudden flurry, a group of riders emerged from the darkness. Amos's men, their silhouettes outlined by torches and bathed in the cold light of dawn. Their leader, a gaunt figure with a face etched in cruelty, brandished a rusted rifle and bellowed a command that made the very ground tremble. "Surrender the widows, or the loot shall be yours to curse." The command sent a shiver of outrage down Eleanor's spine. Without waiting for orders, she stepped forward, voice ringing out with the strength of a woman who had suffered too long in silence. "You have no right to our lives," she declared, the silver locket gleaming like a beacon of defiance in her hand. "We are more than some of our wounds. They are marks of survival." Her words, raw and resolute, reverberated along the ranch's weathered walls as Elias signaled his allies to ready their arms. In the ensuing moments, the air exploded with controlled chaos of defiance. Elias and his men advanced with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Amid the exchange of measured gunfire and shouts that cut through the stillness, the widows fought not only with the tools they had at hand, a battered pitchfork here, a heavy club there, but with the fierce power of their reclaimed identities. Martha, unyielding as the red rock of the desert, drove back any who came too near. Hannah attended quickly to a wounded ranch hand with steady hands and murmured reassurances, while Lydia, her once timid voice now vibrant with determination, aided in flinging debris to block a breach. Through the din, Elias's eyes remained locked on the enemy leader. With a measured step, he advanced into a clearing where the opposing figures stood defiant. Their confrontation was hushed, words few and weighted. A low exchange of threats and proclamations of honor. "Your greed will not enslave us," Elias intoned, his voice carrying histories of loss and the quiet ferocity of a man who knew that true power lies in protecting love rather than taking it by force. The enemy leader's sneer faltered under the weight of Elias's unwavering gaze, and though he gestured mockingly, it was clear that the balance of power had begun to shift. Unbeknownst to Amos's men, the widow's unity had become a tool sharper than any weapon. Amid the clashing sounds, Eleanor had discreetly slipped a locket into the hands of Lydia, entrusting her with the symbol of their defiance. "Guard it well," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with both urgency and hope, "for it carries a truth that will free us all." Lydia's eyes widened at the responsibility, yet she accepted it with a nod that spoke of growing courage, a silent vow that the pendant would not fall into enemy hands. As the battle waged on, the air filled with the acrid tang of burned wood and the metallic scent of blood. Seconds stretched into an eternity as each side measured the other's resolve. Then, in an unexpected twist of fate, one of the enemy riders faltered, tripping over a hidden tide of loose earth meant to serve as a trap by Elias's men. The clamor of his fall sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. Seizing the moment, Elias's allies surged forward, driving the assailants back with renewed vigor. But even as the riders began to retreat, a solitary voice cut through the ruckus. A voice not of the enemy, but their own, Jeremiah. The weathered preacher who had quietly observed from the periphery throughout the night stepped forward with a calm intensity. "Let this day mark the end of our suffering," he declared, his voice rising like incense through the charged air. "Our pain has forged us into unyielding souls, and together we shall leave behind the shackles of our past." His words resonated among the defenders, bolstering spirits and softening the harsh edges of their battle-worn hearts. The confrontation's tide slowly turned. Amos's men, discouraged by the well-coordinated stand and the sight of the widows fighting with the valor of long-denied hearts, began a hasty retreat. The oppressive thunder of hooves receded, replaced by the rattling whispers of the wind stirring the desert dust. Yet even as the immediate threat ebbed, the promise of danger lingered like a specter. The rebellious force of the enemy was not entirely vanquished. Their leader's mocking glare and the bitter echo of his vows still haunted the air. In the subdued aftermath of the assault, as the first hints of a golden sunrise illuminated the scarred horizon, the ranch became a mosaic of triumph and bittersweet memory. Elias watched over the gathered survivors, a motley yet indomitable family forged in hardship, with solemn pride. The battle had been fought with bravery and unity, and now the scars, both physical and emotional, began to heal. Martha's quiet strength, Hannah's gentle tenderness, Lydia's emerging courage, and Eleanor's steadfast defiance had melded into a collective beacon of hope. In a tender, symbolic act of closure, Eleanor retrieved her silver locket from Lydia's careful keeping and, in the hush of the morning, walked out to the river that had once been a crucible of her suffering. Standing at its edge, with water whispering over smooth stones and the desert sky bathed in soft light, she knelt and pressed a locket into the cool, flowing water. "May you carry our sorrow away and leave only hope in your wake," she murmured, her voice a sacred promise to the future. Her act, both poignant and liberating, symbolized the rebirth of not only her spirit, but of the entire found family. Elias stepped quietly behind her, his presence a steadfast reassurance. Around them, the ranch stirred with the promise of new beginnings. Neighbors and allies gathered to share their solidarity, a quiet celebration that the darkness had been repelled, at least for this time. Yet even as the joyful murmurs rose, a shadow lingered in the distance, a final reminder that while the immediate threat had been subdued, the echo of Amos's cruelty might yet return. In that fragile moment, as the sun continued its slow ascent over Red Mesa, hope and apprehension danced hand in hand. The ranch was a sanctuary born from battle and nurtured by the strength of those who dared to dream beyond despair. An uncertain future still lay ahead, but for now, they had forged a bond that no tyrant could shatter. Thank you for watching the final chapter of our Wild West saga. If you found hope in the strength of these resilient women and the quiet heroism of a lonely cowboy, please subscribe, hit the bell for more stories, and share your thoughts below. Which moment inspired you the most? Stay tuned for more tales of grit and redemption from the frontier.